It was a fair few years ago. I remember Caris's first birthday, and Caris is 8 years old now. She's our oldest daughter, and her birthday's in April. And for some reason, I thought it would be a great idea for her birthday, with the family coming around, to have a barbecue. Maybe the weather was slightly warmer than it is now, but it doesn't matter how warm it is in April, it's never actually warm enough for a barbecue, I'll tell you now. So I got everyone outside, and they were all cold, and we were hanging around the barbecue, trying to warm up our hands with the fire and the flames of the barbecue, and no one had a nice time at the barbecue because everyone was cold. And but before, I remember I got the barbecue out for this birthday so we could cook on it. And as I got the barbecue out, and I don't know if there's any, I know there's a few keen barbecuers here, especially over there, and they're going to look in horror about what I'm about to say. And they might give me lessons afterwards. But as I got the barbecue out, I realized that I had not cleaned the barbecue from the last time I did. Okay, don't judge me. Okay, you can judge me because it is quite bad. I had not cleaned the barbecue, and so before the barbecue, I was there scrubbing. Anyway, I was not going to make that mistake again. So after the barbecue, even though everyone was shivering, snow wasn't quite falling, everyone went inside and thought, I'm going to clean this barbecue so that next time I get it out, the barbecue will be clean, tidy, lovely. And so I scrubbed it, as you do, and it's a horrible job cleaning a barbecue, isn't it? And we've not got one of those fancy gas barbecues. We've got one of those barbecues from B&Q for £60, which wobbles as you push it along. So I cleaned the barbecue, and it took me a while, and I don't know if there's a trick, if there's a method, but you're left with all of the ash, aren't you, afterwards? And so I got the ash, and I scooped it up in my hands. I don't know if there's a better method. Let me know on a postcard. If there is, I scooped the ash up, and I put it in the bin, and then I scrubbed. Honestly, the barbecue looked amazing afterwards. And then I went inside and began to warm up, and the party celebrations continued with the heating on inside the house. And we were just sat there talking, doing whatever you do at a one-year-old's birthday party. And I looked out the window, and I thought, that's unusual. Our neighbours are having a barbecue. I thought we were the only weird ones to have a barbecue, but there was definitely smoke coming out from the window. I'm like, that is odd, because not only have I never seen them have a barbecue before, they were like in their 80s, they were quite old, and I thought, that really is odd. Anyway, went back to the party celebrations, looked out the window again, I thought, they're not having a barbecue, they're having a fire out there. I thought, strange. Anyway, there was more and more smoke, so I thought, I should probably go out and check that my neighbours are okay. So I walked out the back door to find my bin on fire from where I'd put the ashes into the bin. I want to tell you, and I want to speak to us as a whole this morning, as a church, but also I want to very much speak to us as individuals this morning. What you think might be dead and worthless, God might not think is dead and worthless. See, honestly, I scooped those ashes up with my hands. I thought in my mind, this is fine. But there was still fire in those ashes. There was still something there. And you might look at your life, or you might look at what you've got, or what's going on, or your past, or your gifts, or whatever it is, and you might think that is never going to do anything. But I believe that God is saying something different to you. You know, it's such a privilege to do church. We love doing church. I love being with you. But if you knew the thoughts that I had in my mind, you'd be thinking, really, Marcus? Are you sure this is you? Because I never feel equipped to do this. I never feel good enough to do this. I never feel right to do this. I never feel like, I always think, oh, God, there's so many people better than me. There's people that are so holy, God. Like, surely they should be pastoring church. God, there's people that know the Bible so much better than me. Surely they should be leading church. Surely they should be up there on the stage. God, there's people that have actually got their lives sorted out, whereas I'm still a mess. I'm still working on myself. I'm still making loads of mistakes. God, why don't you use them? And honestly, that's what I think about myself all the time. But there's still fire in the ashes. God says something different. And sometimes I look at our church, and I love our church. And I'm not speaking bad about our church, because there's some incredible people here. But then very often I know kind of where God is leading us to. And I know that God is calling us into something different and into something new. And I'm God, have you not made a mistake? Because we've not got the ability to do that. We've not got the capability to do that. We've not got the right people to do that. We've not got the right resource to do that. God, we've not got the right time to do that. We can't do that. But I believe that God says, hey, out of those ashes, I can create a fire again. I can create a fire. And for the next few weeks, we're looking at this subject of expansion. The action of becoming larger or more extensive. And I'm excited about that. But I'm nervous, because I know that God is calling us into something new, into something different, into new seasons, into more of what He's wants. But then those thoughts creep into my mind. God, is that us? God, are we going to be able to do that? But those words, hey, out of those ashes, something beautiful can rise. Something beautiful can rise. And so to say, as I speak, I believe this is for us as a church, but it can be for us as individuals as well. Because He's calling us into something new. He's calling us. I keep on looking at this projector and it's still not there, is it? Into being more. They're jumping ahead into something extensive. When we planned this series, kind of at the end of 2022, we sat down and we were looking, okay, God, what are we going to be teaching in the new year? And what are we going to be doing? And we kind of said, we knew we wanted to speak about this subject of expansion. And at the same time, I thought this is going to fit in so well. I'm going to have hundreds and hundreds of stories of expansion, because at the beginning of the new year, we started an extension on our house. And I thought I'm going to be able to step up with these incredible stories about how sacrifice creates new space. And it might be hard on the journey, but right now we are living in a bigger house. Let me tell you, I'm not living in a bigger house. I am living in a building site. With some bricks, with some mess. We sung earlier, God, you turn graves into gardens. We were joking earlier, my garden has been turned into a grave, or something not as beautiful as a grave, because there is no life there. There are no flowers, and it certainly looks very dead. My precious grass is gone. Growth can be difficult. Growth can maybe not always look as it is expected to look. And growth's a journey, isn't it? Expansion's a good journey. I'm going to read to you from Isaiah chapter 54. If you've got your Bibles, you can open them up. If you've got it on your phone, you can follow along as well. Or you can look to this screen on my left. Yep, you're right. As Amber clarified earlier, I want to read to you from Isaiah 54. You might know this text. It might be new to you. It says this: Sing, barren woman, you who never bore a child, burst into song. Shout for joy, you who were never in labor, because more are the children of the desolate woman than her who has a husband, says the Lord. Enlarge the place of your tent Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes, for you will spread out to the right and to the left. Your descendants will dispossess nations and settle in their desolate cities. Do not be afraid. You will not be put to shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. You will not forget the shame of your youth. You will forget the shame of your youth and remember no more the reproach of your widowhood. For your Maker is your husband. The Lord Almighty is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. He is called the God of all the earth. The Lord will call you back as if you were a wife deserted and distressed in spirit, a wife who married young only to be rejected, says your God. For a brief moment, I abandoned you, but with deep compassion, I bring you back. In a surge of anger, I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting kindness, I will have compassion on you, says the Lord. Hey, when Isaiah wrote these words down, this place of enlargement, Israel, well, they were not in Israel. They were in captivity, as is the habit. If you've kind of read the Old Testament, if you know kind of a little bit of the nation of Israel's story, God's kind of chosen people, they go through these patterns of, God, you're great, and then forgetting that God is great, doing whatever they wanted, and then God having to remind them that he is great, but them kind of rejecting that advice, and then kind of Israel kind of as a nation kind of losing the presence of God from them. And very often kind of then that because God isn't there, because they're not welcoming God, because they're not obeying God, they find their lives in a complete mess. And so that might mean very often someone else ruling the nation of Israel rather than God ruling the nation of Israel, because the people have rejected God. And the Bible, basically the Old Testament, the stuff that happened before Jesus, very much just is this loop and loop and loop of this same story going round and round again. And you might think that's a bit repetitive. You might think that, why didn't God just sort them out? But I'm really glad of those stories in the Bible, because just as we were singing this morning, I was praying, and like I said, my life is nowhere near perfect, and I make mistakes, and one of the mistakes I constantly make is shouting at my children in the morning, telling them to get up, to get going, causing stress first thing, and I'm always like apologizing to God for that. And again this morning, I'm like coming to God, and I'm like, God, here I am again. It's me. Yeah, and you know why I'm here, God? Because it's the same reason. Well, actually, the last 2 days, it's been great because I've been away. And so I've not shouted at my children in the morning, telling them to get up. Actually, that's not true. On Friday morning, Sean FaceTimed me, and I still managed to shout at my children through FaceTime, telling them to get up. But I'm like, God, I'm here again. I'm here. It's me. God, I have messed up yet again. And God just reminded me, because I'm like, God, how many times are you going to forgive me? Because I don't deserve it, God. God, I come to you, I apologize, I say help me, and then the next day, I'm doing it again. And just this overwhelming sense of, I'm going to keep on forgiving you. I'm going to keep on loving you. And that's what we see in this story of Isaiah as well. As he's talking, so the people are living in captivity. They're living in a place where they know they should not be. They're not living in the place that God has asked them to be in because of their own mistakes. And in that we kind of get this verse of, enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Don't hold back, but lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes. And even in a place of desolation, even a place of hurt, even in a place of brokenness, God is calling them to expand. As a church, we believe that kind of our purpose, our mission, our reason for being here is to bring life. That's a whole range of life, but life into broken communities, life into broken lives, and the life that God can bring, that fullness of life that only He can bring. And we love doing that, and we believe that God is calling us to expand on that, to bring more life and to grow. And we might know some of where God is calling us into. And next week, we're going to talk about one of the areas that we believe that God is calling us into as we go on this journey of expansion. And so some of it is known, but some of it's unknown as well. But we're saying, God, we're trusting you on this journey. We might not feel good enough. We might not feel ready enough, Lord. But we're going to follow you. We're going to trust you, and we're going to keep our eyes on you. And maybe in your personal life, God's prompting you to grow somewhere, to do something different, to step into an area that you've never stepped into. And you might feel exactly the same. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. And my heart is that our response today is, God, we might not feel good enough. We might not feel ready. But help us to follow you. Help us to follow you. And this morning, I just want to look at a few different things, 3 things to talk about when we look at expansion, when we look at growth, kind of 3 fundamentals, in my opinion, humble opinion, that I think we need to kind of settle in us. Number 1 is, let's talk about the reason why we expand. Because, let me tell you right now, expansion isn't easy. I can tell you that personally, as our house is being extended, it's not easy. It's not even that bad at the moment. It's going to get worse. But you've got people in your house, and sometimes you're still getting ready in the morning, and the builders are in your kitchen. And it's not always easy. We're getting through bags and bags of sugar. Our kettle is constantly on. There's mess. Our children can't play in the back garden anymore. And it's not always easy. A few years ago, I had a job. I have a job now. But I had another job. And I worked at a Bible college, and part of my job was to organize this ceremony every year where our students would graduate. And we didn't have enough room on site, and so we used to get a tent in. And I say a tent, it's like a marquee, a big marquee. And so I'd ring them up, and it used to cost a lot of money to hire this marquee for the day. And then they would come in a few days before the event to start setting up this tent. And they would come in articulated lorries. They would come in with all of this stuff. And I wouldn't watch them the whole time because that would be a waste of time. But there's these big guys, and it's hard work. I don't know if you like camping. I don't particularly enjoy camping. It's not what God has called me to do. He has called me to stay in hotels. But I have camped, and it's not too bad. But a few years ago, we used to take our youth on camps to this camp called Soul Survivor, and it was great, but it was camping. And it was so funny watching the young people try to put up their tents. It was hilarious. They've never done it before. They've not got a clue what they're doing. And it can be hard putting up a tent. There's probably some of you, some experienced campers in this place. And you're like, Marcus, it's easy. I don't always think putting up a tent is easy. And I remember sitting with these young people who are like, we can't put up our tent. We don't know what we're doing. And I think they just wanted someone else to come and put up their tent. And I was like, no, but we've got to put up your tent. And they're like, we can't put up your tent. I said, well, are you sure you can't put up your tent? And they're like, we can't put up our tent. I said, well, you're going to be sleeping under the stars then. Somehow they managed to put up their tent. because they didn't want to sleep outside. They didn't want to get changed outside. They didn't want to get soaking wet. And they didn't want all of their stuff to get soaking wet. Because even though they knew that growth, expansion, potting up their tent might be difficult, they knew there was a reason for it. They weren't putting up a tent for fun. They weren't putting up a tent because they were bored. They were putting up a tent because they needed somewhere to sleep for the next few nights. And I believe as we kind of look at this passage in Isaiah, the people knew there was a reason. You see, they understood God's word to Abraham many, many years ago about having a place for them to live, having a place to call their own. And they understood that covenant. They understood that where they were was not the place that God had asked them to be. They understood the reason behind it. They knew that they weren't in the right place. They knew they weren't where they should be. They knew the reason. And when we look at expansion, when we look at growth, it's so important to know the reason. The reason behind it. So, why? What are we called to? Because there's no point in just having a bigger tent. We've got to ask God, why do we need a bigger tent? What is your calling? What has God asked you to do? What has God asked us to do as a church? What is our calling? Because God gives us different gifts. God gives us different abilities, and we've got to grow into who God has called us to be. Some of you might remember if you've been in church a while, but a long time ago when we were here, I hated it, but I have this problem where I struggle to stay still. You might have noticed that whilst I'm preaching, because I walk up and down a lot. You might have noticed it if I'm just stood there, because I'm not just stood there, I'm like shaking, not shaking, but I'm like looking around a little bit. Like I struggle to stay still, and sometimes I can be too enthusiastic, much to the disgust of other people. And a long time ago, someone noticed Mark Bean, and he used to lead this church. He noticed that I struggled to stay still, and he noticed that I jump, and he noticed that I was loud. And for some stupid reason, Mark thought it'd be good if I did that on stage, because he thought it might encourage other people to move around rather than just kind of standing there in worship. They might look up, they might smile, they might be happy, they might jump. And he thought, if we bring that up onto stage, that will help. And so I joined the worship team. Now, another thing you might realize if you've stood close to me in worship is not just that I move, not just that you might get a hand in your face as I move, you might also notice that my singing voice is not the best. It is not something that comes naturally to me. It is not something that I particularly enjoy. I mean, I enjoy singing, but mainly in the shower when no one can hear me. Or in the car, and I often think as other people are driving past in their car, they're thinking, what is he doing? But it's not something I enjoy. Anyway, a few years ago, we felt called to go to another church. And they had seen a photo of me on Facebook on stage leading worship. And though I went to this church and they said, oh, it's great, you can lead worship. I said, no. You don't want me leading worship. You don't want me singing. I'm rubbish at it. It is not who I am. It is not what I'm called to do. It's not who I'm called to be. It's not my calling. And we've got to understand what God has called us to be. It can be easy to look at another person or another church and say, hey, that's great. But it might not be who we are. As well as our calling, we've got to understand our motivation. Our motivation. We might be driven to grow. We might be driven to extend our tents, to stretch it out wide. But why? Why? I struggle with our children sometimes. They have a love of YouTube. They have a love of technology. They have a love of sitting on the sofa. They do not have a love of tidying their rooms. They do not have a love of putting their clothes away. They do not have a love of putting their plates in the dishwasher or even on the kitchen side. That would be a step of progress. And sometimes I'll walk into the front room and they'll be there watching YouTube or whatever it is they're watching. I'll say, "Oh, girls, can you go and tidy your rooms?" No response. Girls, can you... And they've got activities that they're meant to do, like Seren is meant to practice the piano every day. Caris is meant to do some exercises every day. They're meant to do their homework. I said, "Girls, how about doing your homework?" They do not look up. "Girls, do you fancy putting your clothes away?" Nothing. "Girls, who wants 20 quid? They look up. They give me their full attention because there's some motivation going on. And there's good motivation and there's bad motivation. You know, as we talk about this subject of expansion, I want to tell you just personally as kind of, me and Sean leading this church along with our team, we hate the idea of hundreds of people being in this building. Last week, it was like we had dedications, and it was beautiful to dedicate loads of free children. And we had a family come in from our community, and it was great in that, like, so many of these young people have been through our youth groups and come into stuff in the different weeks. And it was lots of people afterwards were coming up to me, and they were saying, "Marcus, it was great, wasn't it? So many people in church." And I'm like, "No, I hated it." Not that I hate people being in church, but I don't think that's who God's called us to be. I don't think he's called us to have 200 people packed into this room, mainly because I can never get a cup of tea when there's 200 people packed in this room, and I don't operate very well without cups of tea. Like, I need the Holy Spirit and I need caffeine to work. God's called us to be something different. Now, God's still called us to expand. God's still called us to grow. Because I love the idea of hundreds of people coming to know Jesus. I just don't like the idea of hundreds of people being in this building. But we've got to understand our motivation. And as well as understanding our motivation and getting that right, sometimes we've got to look at the distractions as well that we might need to get rid of. Again, with my children, as well as offering them 20 quid to do something, which I don't actually do because that would get quite expensive very quickly, I've noticed something else that generally works. We've got this little black box in our front room. It says Virgin Media on the side of it. And there's a switch on this, and when I switch that off, suddenly my children appear, mainly to moan that their tablets are not working anymore. But sometimes we've got to say, "Hey, God, what's distracting us from what you're calling us into?" And finally, we've got to understand our calling. We've got to understand our motivation. But that needs to spur us to action. And we'll look more at this over the next few weeks. But what do our actions look like? You see in that text in Isaiah, it says, "Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch out the curtains wide." It does not say, "I will enlarge the place of your tent. I will stretch out the curtains wide. I will cause you to expand." There's an action required from the people. And as we want to grow as individuals and as we want to grow as a church, that requires action. Our lives will look different. Used to teach some stuff at Bible college, and I used to look at priorities and in terms of our personal management and self-leadership. And I used to do this exercise with people where I would get them to write down what they thought their priorities were, what they thought, was the right thing for them to be doing. And so they would write down this list of 5 things, 10 things maybe, if they were particularly enthusiastic. And so then they would write this down, and then I'd call for a volunteer, and they would come up. And I said, can you read out your list? And they would read out their list. And I said, would you mind getting out your calendar or your diary? And so they might get out their calendar and their diary. And I said, can you show me on your calendar where these priorities are? And I never made them do this, but I would say to them, hey, and why don't you open up, if you got it on your line, or get your bank statement out? Show me your priorities, because we can write down our priorities, we can write down what we think is important, but if you want to really know what your priorities are in life, have a look in your calendar, have a look on your bank statement. They'll tell you what they are. And we might be thinking, oh God, this is a priority for me. This is where I want to grow. This is what I want to do, God. I think you're calling me into this, but our actions might say something completely different. What we're actually doing. God, I want to be fit. I want to be healthy, God. I want to walk down the street and people say, look at those muscles. I don't laugh that much. But all I do is sit on the sofa and eat food. God, I want to be debt-free. But that Amazon app on my phone keeps on being open. And that buy it now button is blooming amazing. God, I want to be in a healthy relationship. But I spend 3 hours a day on Facebook rather than investing into that. What do our actions say about what God is calling us to do? We're going to break into some groups for a few minutes to start discussing this. We've not done discussion groups for a few weeks, so maybe you've missed out on that. Maybe you've not been part of that. But what we love to do, just at the end of kind of a message, is we're going to turn some chairs around and we're going to get into groups of 6 people-ish. I noticed over the last few weeks our groups have been getting quite big. So let's try and small those down. And there's some ideas of questions that you could be asking. You don't have to talk about those. Those are just ideas. But discuss what do you think about expansion? What do you think about what we've been talking about this morning? And you can discuss this, but maybe as well in the next few minutes in your group, if it's right, if it's fitting, you don't just have to discuss. You could pray for one another as well. You could say, hey, where are you going to find that hard? Or where would you value someone praying for you in that as well? So we're going to say goodbye to the people online now. It's been great you joining us. You can...
Thank you so much for watching The Preach. It has been an amazing morning and we would love to see you in the week at any of our events. So stay up to date on our social media, on our website. Keep checking because we update things all the time. We have so much going on and we'd love to see you there. Have a great week.